This section we're going to talk about is just some basic things that might help you understand the potential challenges that come along with the perspective drawing or perspective drawing with your figure. Again, we're trying to address the foundation practices to build a greater awareness of how they impact what we do with figures. So again, the most often used forms that I'll find myself returning to when constructing figures would be the ones that we already discussed, right? So being comfortable with boxes, and okay, and I know it sounds like you're all probably rolling your eyes like, really, we really doing boxes? Yes, we are, and you're gonna like it, but you don't have to like it, but it's helpful. So let's just take this one thing and then explore what's here as competencies to start. So if I'm drawing a box, what do I need to understand? Yep, all the stuff about perspective, sure, right? All that stuff's important. Vanishing point, this, that. But what is really involved in drawing a box? Well, it's how good are you at making a straight line? Really, because with a box, what I'm deciding on is a height, a width, and a depth, right? And it could tilt and move in any number of direction, right? But the most important thing is that I'm confident putting down a straight and then matching that to other straight lines. So sometimes in foundation drawing practices, what I'll do with students is actually the first week, what I'll do with students is fill up, a page where you're plotting points and then practicing ghosting, right? So getting the habit of ghosting, not like you're avoiding somebody you met on a dating app, not that kind of ghosting, right? Or instead, you're kind of getting in the habit of pushing or pulling, whatever you're comfortable with, your pen across the paper or pencil across the paper or stylus from one point to the other. So I might practice this a few times and then throw the line. And then, you could go through a process of being very critical, like, well, I get a little bit of a wobble there. And, at the end, it kind of hooks. And so this would be a way of really trying to refine and better your ability to show and demonstrate perspective. And it's not that you can't draw boxes or you can't understand perspective. It might just be that you need practice on your penmanship, draftsperson qualities. So that would be one. Another one that we talk about in foundation class would be, start with a center point and then draw a series of lines through it that are all equal length, right? And the goal is to try to get them to all be the same and kind of all go through the same point. And so what you're doing with this one, right, where this one might be more structured in the sense that like you're plotting the points probably in a way you're going to be more comfortable with. An exercise like this makes you challenge the mechanics of how you make a line by moving your hand in multiple different directions. And if you want, you can spin the paper or the page if that helps. But this would be kind of the anatomy of trying to understand the drawing angle of what goes into the box or the perspective of the box. So this is a really common form that I would use in figures. And primarily I would use it, as representations for the rib cage and pelvis, right? So when I'm getting to that point in my landmarks drawing with the figure, I'm often trying to determine what the proportional size of a box would be that matches that rib cage structure. And I'll plot that later in a way that I think will be easier to understand. Next step would be to kind of now try to see them all as if they're made of glass. Like in these first two, I just showed you one side. So in this one, I'm trying to see like, what's the other side doing? What's the back of it doing? And that's not something you always have to do, but I think to get started, it can be helpful. And then I would use a box also for a pelvis. So my pelvis would be going this way. And of course, when I'm drawing a figure, I don't plot vanishing points because there'd be too many and they'd be too far from the paper. So instead, I'm always just kind of doing my best to turn and maneuver these forms in space. So let's say that you're at the fundamental or the kind of the anatomical level of line that you're comfortable making a box. That would be where I mostly find myself critiquing student work, is that And you could check your own for this, but the most common error I see is that when students learning basic perspective for figures start out here, um, they make lines that go slightly different directions, are a little bit wobbly, right, and just don't kind of match up. And it's always encouraging because you can see that people understand how to do the idea of the box, but it always comes back to this issue of, you know, the technical side. So what always has to happen is if I'm making a box, one or in most cases a 1 or 2 point perspective, I just want to make all of the lines going in the same direction parallel, right? And then just get that easy, the easy looking kind of straight direction to it. So one would, I think the first kind of iteration I drew there is warped. It just feels like it's melting or it's distorting. And that makes your figure look distorted, right? Because nobody cares about just the look of a box. What we care is how it supports the line and the information that we stack on top that ultimately hides the box. We want to keep all of the perspective qualities, but make no box present. And that's the goal, at least, of, I think, direct drawing. So a few things about that, right? Another would be, how comfortable are you drawing spheres? I do the same thing, right? I would ghost, like I'm ghosting this. You could see my stylus moving or the mouse moving. I kind of get into what I want the sphere to be, and then kind of drop pressure. And I'm not saying that all of mine are perfect, because they're not. They're often pretty bad. The goal is just to get as good as we can with them. So different exercises would be, see if you can make concentric, ellipses or spheres that get smaller but kind of maintain that size throughout, or filling up sketchbooks, right? Like sometimes on the sketchbook pages for warm-ups, you can just fill up rows, right, where you're trying to get your spheres or your ellipses, which we'll talk about next, accurate, or as accurate as you can get them. If you struggle with spheres, which I certainly do, and a lot of people that I know do, you can try to work them from a plane. So if I have, let's just say I'm using a plane, which would be a box, I can carve it into halves, so a vertical and a horizontal half, and I can do the same thing with my diagonals. And what am I practicing here? My straights. Right? So everything comes back to, what are the rote mechanics of drawing? So we went beyond the three lines into our geometric forms when we started talking, but all of them are just made from these. So, a sphere is just continued C curves, or 3 or 4 more C curves combined to make that object or that form. So, getting the 3 lines and your level of comfort developed with those is everything. But back to this. If you want some help, right, the outer edges of my sphere would hit those points. And you could do the same thing. Well, it's also going to hit these points too. And then that gives me like training wheels to help me see and kind of spend a little bit more time developing accuracy. It's not a competition, it's just for me. So one thing I'm noticing is like all of my spheres, the line pressure is heavier in the bottom left. I don't think I've noticed that before. So that's bonus. You get that, bonus element there that you learn what I'm bad at. So that's something I should probably work on, right? Because it means that as I'm making my eggs, or let's say my spheres, I have a tendency to maybe push more line quality down here. Okay, so I'll just keep that in mind, that there's more of a pressure in that area, or I seem to hit that a little bit harder. But for the most part, I want to just kind of be comfortable with the idea of being able to have something that resembles a sphere of different sizes, which isn't too wobbly, right? It's not too far off the mark. It doesn't look too much like an egg here because I'm just practicing my spheres. So that would be, in terms of our roster of shapes, if we go back to our dictionary or maybe dictionary, but alphabet or vocabulary of form, let's just review the idea that we have these 3 lines. They can generate this range of perspective forms. We've talked about a box and a sphere. And then the last one that I use would be the cylinder. So what is a cylinder other than a couple ellipses with some straights? And that's all it is. So first part would be, well, ellipses are hard. So how can I practice those? And any number of exercises, right? Like you could do the same thing as I did here. So let's say you have, so just to give you a more concrete example, let's say you have a sketchbook you like to keep. And sometimes in a sketchbook, I'll practice my straights. I'll do some straights here, and then I'll make them broader every time. And then I'll just use these as practice sheets. So maybe on this upper row here, I'm just going to practice ellipses at this angle. And I'm going to try to match every ellipse as I go across. So you can see I'm not nailing it, but the practice is what's important. So what am I looking for when I do these? In terms of the ellipse, so first let's say, what's an ellipse? Well, an ellipse would just be this idea, right? The circle, but turned in perspective, right? So if let's say I'm going to turn this plane, because we're going to start out drawing it, right? So I'm turning this plane. So this is flat. Now it's going away in space. I could try to break it up the same way, half diagonals. Here's my points. So all an ellipse is just a sphere in perspective. So that's it, right? All I've done with these is give them a tilt. So if we were to give a few more kind of terms, the long axis of the ellipse is called the major axis, and the short axis is called the minor axis. So those axes are important and they're useful, and that's kind of why we started with them here, is they give you those points of reference, but they're more useful in terms of the ellipses because let's say I take this out. When I have, or I'm thinking that major axis, that angle or that tilt, when I'm drawing the ellipse, I'm trying to maintain a symmetry to it, right? So that there's an even amount of space on each side. And when I come back and double check these ellipses, I can put this major axis through there and see how well I've done. So some are good, some are bad, and that's okay. And then maybe halfway through, I'll change. Maybe I'll try to broaden the minor axes and then make some go this way and just challenge myself to draw ellipses from different angles or sizes. So I'll fill up pages with that. And then maybe in this one, we'll do like a curve to separate this. And then I'll use this to challenge myself with spheres. So I want to fit spheres in here, but as they get, now I'm going to have to try to make them smaller to fit. And then maybe going back this way. So what I'm showing here is not anything new. You can find this information with probably more extensive explanation on, Draw a Box for free, or, Peter Hahn's YouTube videos, or Scott Robertson's books have a greater technical quality that they bring to this and the explanation. Mine is much looser and more kind of drawing forward, right? Or just practical, kind of get it out there, less information on the heavy-handed perspective stuff, which I'm not knocking at all. And then here we could just fill in a few more, like maybe I'll try to do this way but thinner. But one thing you can notice or try to pay attention to when you're doing these is that you likely will have a direction that you're comfortable drawing in. Like I don't seem to be very good top left here, but I'm also now trying not to ghost as much. Right? I'm trying not to lay it in slowly and then drop line pressure. Here I'm trying to be a little bit more direct, see if I can sweep that one line around. And so I could see all these areas where, I still have some practice that I could be doing. Another one we could do here would be maybe we split this, and then maybe I'll do that exercise and see how well I can do keeping those spheres concentric. Maybe I'll use that as a grid. The basic idea as far as the ellipse goes is that when I'm using them in terms of now the cylinder, what I want is a basic understanding of how they're describing and demonstrating space. So as far as a cylinder goes, let's say I take like this same basic ellipse, but we'll make it horizontal, right? The only thing I want to avoid, especially when it comes time to doing the cylinders, is too much of like a football shape. Right, so get it kind of like more like that. It tends to break the ellipse a bit. Now to get the cylinder 2 straights off the side, and then whatever this is, you cap it on the other side. Done. So the ellipses, and if you want, if it's helpful to you, you can draw all the way through. You know, I don't always remember to do that, but it's fine. And you can double check on both of these, the anatomy of how the ellipse is made. You can double check your major and minor axes, and even if and how these are symmetrical. So that one's a little off, but not by too much. When I go on to make drawings that kind of demonstrate more of a perspective with these, the only thing to keep in mind as they apply to the figure is that this is always going to be established, the width, at something slightly larger than the bone, right? So I don't want that to change. And I notice that people do that a lot in their cylinder drawings, where like this gets really big and then it looks distorted relative to the back. So all I ever change in my cylinders once I've determined the width is the minor axes if I want to demonstrate a difference in space. So let's say I want to tilt this forward to you, or forward more to your eye or the camera. I'm going to keep the same width, but open this distance. So my intention was that this would be the same, but that the minor axis gets bigger, so that when we see now the cylinder, whoops, I don't think I want to foreshorten it yet. Now maybe we lose some of the height, but this would be descriptive more of a form or a cylindrical form seen from above. Whereas this is more eye level. And then conversely, right, if we keep going, you know, eventually, like let's do another one over here, it just becomes a sphere again. So maybe this one, what we'll do is converge a little bit just to kind of force the camera angle, and then here'd be the bottom there. But the main thing in these is do your best to try to copy this to this. Right, if you lose that, then I usually refer to this in drawing, like let's say this is one. So we have this cylinder, and then I kind of make this like go like that. That looks like toothpaste to me. So describing the same form or a sympathetic form to what a tube of toothpaste would look like. Not bad, right? If you like toothpaste, it's good. I don't dislike toothpaste, I just don't want it in my figures. The problem would be it's one side remains volumetric and the other side is cinched, so I lose form there. For me, in terms of the figure, these, like I said with the boxes, they're all intended to be built over, use line or value or anatomical detail to conceal the perspective while maintaining the same illusion of the form and the volume there. So that's it. Right? Box, sphere, cylinder are the main ones that I'm going to play around with. The ones I'll use in the figure. I don't really use cones and pyramids in figure construction that often. You know, a cone would just be a cylinder with straights. A pyramid would be a plane with straights. But that's pretty much it. So let's say you're comfortable with these, right? You're feeling good. You know, you don't have all the problems that I do, and you'd like an exercise to try to push the way that these interact. Well, I think one of the best exercises for that would just be form intersections. So in this next part, what we're going to do is use some of these volumes to take a look at how we can start to combine, modify, sculpt, add, subtract in the abstract still, so that we can take that technique, take that skill, and then add it to our figures.